This is the story of Malawi's Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda, who was one of the more enigmatic big men of the post-independence era in Africa. Banda has been described as one of the most extraordinary people of the 20th century, and he lived three different lives, first as a peasant, a medical doctor, and essentially the king of Malawi. There were many conflicting reports of Hastings Banda's early life, and the man himself was the clear epitome of the word paradox. Kamuzu Banda fought against colonial domination but also worked closely with apartheid South Africa. He was the Prime Minister of Malawi's first independent government that was formed in July of 1964, and in 1971 he became the life president of Malawi. As the country's self-declared life president, Banda transformed Malawi into a repressive dictatorship that spanned 3 decades. Schools, airports, highways, and hospitals bore his name, and his portrait could be seen in every public and private office and home. He was the embodiment of personal rule. In this episode of African Biographics, we cover the story of Hastings Kamuzu Banda of Malawi, who has been described as one of the oldest African dictators, as well as the history of Malawi. The man known to history as Hastings Kamuzu Banda was born around 1896 near Kasungu in Nyasaland, now present-day Malawi. Many years later, when he became the leader of Malawi, Kamuzu was always cagey about his age and claimed to have been born in 1906, though most sources place his birth year as 1898. Banda's name Kamuzu means little root, and the name was bestowed on him to commemorate the ending of his mother's infertility by a potion prepared from root herbs. Later, he took the name Hastings from John Hastings, a Scottish missionary whom he admired. Throughout Banda's reign, little was said or known of his father, and he liked to tell people that his mother had raised him on her own. As a small child, Kamuzu Banda witnessed a seemingly miraculous medical procedure that involved a tree branch with a piece of string attached to it. This instrument was used to wrench an arrow from a patient's back. Kamuzu was impressed by what he had witnessed, and he came to the important decision that one day he was going to become a medical doctor. A few years before Kamuzu was born, the first British protectorate in the territory of present-day Malawi was established in 1891 under the name Nyasaland Districts Protectorate. This included the land adjoining Lake Nyasa. From 1907 onward, it was called the Nyasaland Protectorate. Under the colonial regime, roads and railways were built, and the cultivation of cash crops by European settlers was introduced. On the other hand, the colonial administration did little to enhance the welfare of the African majority because of commitment to the interests of European settlers. The colonial regime failed to develop African agriculture, and many able-bodied men migrated to neighboring countries to seek employment. As Banda was growing up near Lake Nyasa, the first mission schools were founded among the Chewa people by Scottish missionaries. These missionaries changed African society forever. They also made a deep impression on the young Banda to such an extent that when he became a fully grown man, he never lost his links with Scotland and its church. Young Kamuzu Banda was falsely accused by his missionary teacher of cheating in an exam at the age of 15, and in 1915 or early in 1916, he left for South Africa. Legend has it that he walked some 1,300 miles through the wilderness to the gold mines of Johannesburg. He found employment at the Witwatersrand deep mine in Boksburg, and for the first time was exposed to the rough life of a growing mining city. It would be another 43 years before he would see the land of his birth again. Kamuzu Banda never forgot his experience in the mines of Johannesburg, and when later he became head of state, he would always oppose labor migration to South Africa on the grounds that, among other things, it rendered the migrants vulnerable to criminal elements and to sexually transmitted diseases from prostitutes in the cities. Although he was fully employed there in South Africa, Banda's quest for further education remained prominent in his personal plan, and to achieve this goal, he enrolled at a local night school. In 1922, Kamuzu Banda would join the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and in November of the following year attended the church's annual meeting in Bloemfontein. It was there where he met an American who agreed to sponsor his travel to the United States to further his education. In December of 1931, Kamuzu was awarded a Bachelor of Philosophy degree from the University of Chicago with a double major in history and politics. In 1932, he became a student at the Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee. The time that he spent in Nashville was a tough one. Nashville, Tennessee displayed the most virulent racism Banda had seen since his years in Southern Africa. After qualifying as a doctor in 1937, Kamuzu Banda relocated to Edinburgh, Scotland, where in 1938 he became a student at the School of Medicine of the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons. For him, such additional qualifications were necessary in order to practice within the British Empire. One of his dreams was to return to Nyasaland as a medical missionary. In 1941, Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda set up his practice in a poor area of Liverpool, waiving fees for poor patients and even paying the rents of some of the poorest. Dr. Banda was said to be particularly good with children, and he was welcomed into people's homes and gained acceptance and integration into this society. After the Second World War, Dr. Kamuzu Banda established a thriving practice in London, and as a doctor in London, he enjoyed a prosperous middle-class life, owned a house, drove a small car, and even dabbled on the stock market. The doctor even took to wearing a black Homburg hat and carrying a road umbrella. It was around this time that Kamuzu Banda started becoming an intensely conservative figure. He was made an elder of the Church of Scotland and developed puritanical views on dancing and dress. He even imposed these values on post-independence Malawi, but I'll touch on this later. Also known as the Federation of Rhodesia Nyasaland, the Central African Federation was a political unit that was created in 1953. As I alluded to, it consisted of the British settler-dominated colony of Southern Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and the territories of Northern Rhodesia, now Zambia, and Nyasaland, now Malawi, which were under the control of the British Colonial Office. In fact, from the 1920s, white European settlers in the Rhodesias had sought some way to come together in order to counter the overwhelming numerical superiority of black Africans. In addition to this, the election of the National Party in South Africa in 1948 worried the British government, which began to see the Federation as a potential counter to the apartheid policies that were now being introduced in South Africa. Now, the African population in Northern Rhodesia and Nyasaland consistently opposed the formation of this federation, which they feared would be dominated by Southern Rhodesia. And they were right, as throughout the 1950s, policies in the federation were seen to be largely to the advantage of the white population of the South. At the time of the federation, in Nyasaland, which was smaller and poorer than both Rhodesian territories, there was no improvement in education and almost exclusive concentration on Southern Rhodesian investments. When the Federation became law on 1 August 1953, Hastings Kamuzu Banda was disgusted with his own failure to prevent it. At that time, he had left London for Kumasi in Ghana, where he continued to practice medicine. Banda went to Ghana partly because of a scandal involving his receptionist in Hastings in the UK. His secretary became pregnant with his child and her husband filed for divorce. When Banda fled from Britain to Ghana, his secretary followed him, but he rejected her and he never supported their child. Now, on 6 July 1958, Hastings Kamuzu Banda finally returned to his native country at the plea of a new NSC member named Henry Chipembere. Chipembere had refused to give up the struggle against federation, and he felt that a strong, intelligent and charismatic leader, old enough to take charge yet young enough to endure dynamic anti-federation action, was needed to lead the fight for black equality and self-government in Nyasaland. Therefore, Kamuzu Banda was the natural choice. Although many people in Nyasaland had not heard of Banda before that year, the NAC had constructed a powerful image of him, presenting him as the only African able to deal effectively with Europeans given his education and experience of living in the West. People also believed that Kamuzu possessed supernatural powers. They said he could appear among his enemies without being seen. He could take the shape of a crocodile and that he rode the backs of hyenas at night. They even said the wind obeyed his will. However, persuading Banda to end his voluntary exile was not so easy. It was only after securing a guarantee that he would assume the presidency of the NAC that Hastings Kamuzu Banda returned to Nyasaland. On the day of his return on 6 July 1958, Hastings Kamuzu Banda received a Messiah's welcome from 4,000 people. It was his first return to his native land in 43 years. Within a few months of Banda's arrival, the NAC was reorganized and the political atmosphere in Nyasaland became highly charged. His speeches echoed in the air as he toured the country, gathering support against the Federation. Kamuzu Banda was received enthusiastically wherever he spoke, and resistance to imperialism among the Malawians became increasingly common. At the same time, however, he persisted in speaking only English, with an interpreter translating his messages into vernacular languages. Some of his critics at the time pointed out to the fact that he lived like a white man, insisting on moving into an area declared white residential and never giving up his famous costume of a three-piece suit, black Homburg hat and brown leather gloves. But anyways, Kamuzu Banda was really hell-bent on fighting for independence for his country. And so predictably, a bad relationship with the colonial government swiftly followed. In January and February of 1959, riots and minor incidents took place in various parts of Nyasaland. The governor, Sir Robert Armitage, became convinced that the government was facing a widespread conspiracy, including a plot to murder white people, and that's why he summoned Rhodesian troops to help keep order. But this only exacerbated the crisis. On the 3rd of March 1959, Robert Armitage declared a state of emergency in Nyasaland. Banda's party, the NAC, was banned, and he and many congressional leaders were imprisoned in Gwelo, southern Rhodesia. Hundreds of others were detained in various parts of Nyasaland, mainly at Kanchenza. The emergency measures that had been enforced in Malawi provoked even more disorder. Riots and demonstrations broke out in which nearly 50 Africans died. During this period, Kamuzu's NAC was renamed to the Malawi Congress Party, the MCP, and leadership of the organization was temporarily assumed by Oton Chirwa, who was released from prison in August of 1959. Now, the description of Nyasaland as a police state reverberated around the world, and this severely damaged Britain's reputation for progressive colonial management. These events of 1959 made Britain jettison all long-term plans for independence. They decided to accelerate the whole process. When he was released from prison on 1 April 1960, Kamuzu Banda took over the helm of the MCP, and afterwards he decamped to London, where with Kenneth Kaunda of Zambia and Joshua Nkomo of Zimbabwe, he continued campaigning for an end to the Federation. After constitutional talks in London attended by various political interests, Kamuzu Banda accepted British constitutional proposals, granting Africans in Nyasaland a majority in the Legislative Council. Banda's party won the general elections held in August of 1961. The British decided in 1962 that Nyasaland would be allowed to secede from the Federation. Banda's MCP swept into power, and he served as the Minister of Natural Resources and Local Government, a position he sought because he viewed it as being crucial to the development of the country. In January of 1963, Hastings Kamuzu Banda became the Prime Minister. On 6 July 1964, Nyasaland achieved independence and was renamed Malawi. Northern Rhodesia became independent as Zambia on 24 October of that year. However, white settlers in southern Rhodesia announced a unilateral declaration of independence on 11 November 1965. This is a story for another day. Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda retained the post of Prime Minister when Nyasaland achieved independence. At independence in 1964, there was moderate optimism concerning Malawi's economic future, which was heralded by a new dawn. And for sure, development was badly needed. Nyasaland was a quiet colonial backwater, serving as a labor reservoir for the more industrialized neighboring regions of Rhodesia and South Africa. Fully acknowledging Malawi's unfavorable starting position, Dr. Hastings Banda chose a somewhat unorthodox development strategy. Instead of pursuing industrialization as other African countries had done, Banda's policy concentrated on the expansion of the agricultural production of cash crops, mainly tobacco and tea. This development strategy seemed to succeed during the first years after independence. Malawi was held up as an example of African development and enjoyed impressive growth rates between 1970 and 1979. By devoting its meager treasury and considerable energies to its one natural resource, which was farmland, for most years Malawi did not need to import food. Often during this time, there was even enough food to export, a rarity in Africa. These were the honeymoon days, and to his admirers, Kamuzu Banda was a rare moral ruler in Africa who wanted his people to observe what he called the four cornerstones: unity, loyalty, obedience, and discipline. Unfortunately, Kamuzu's development system failed Malawi's most vulnerable people. The country's agricultural miracle ironically bypassed the majority of the rural population, subsistence farmers who suffer some of the highest child malnutrition and death rates in East and Central Africa. To make matters worse, soon after independence, Kamuzu Banda succeeded in gaining control over the economy through the Press Corporation, a private company which he owned. Press Corporation enjoyed a near monopoly in industry, financing and trade. In the early 1970s, Kamuzu Banda appropriated and distributed a large number of tobacco estates, giving them to his followers in the MCP. On the other hand, Malawi and Banda became engulfed in a political crisis just 8 weeks after the country attained independence. Also, his rule of Malawi quickly descended into what others have labeled as being despotic. Hastings Kamuzu Banda's authority was tested by a cabinet crisis that began in September of 1964. In this instance, his ministers demanded the immediate Africanization of Malawi's white-dominated economy and urged Banda to take a hostile stance toward colonialist South Africa and Mozambique, which at the time was a Portuguese colony. The ministers also questioned Banda's refusal to recognize Communist China, even though China had offered the impoverished African country first $6 million, then $18 million in sorely needed aid. Well, Kamuzu had announced that the amount of aid China offered was immaterial and that he was not going to be bribed to recognize their communist regime. Most of all, the ministers objected to their state of being powerless. They held no real power against the imposing Banda, and the Prime Minister would often refer to them as his boys. At the time, Prime Minister Banda had imbibed none of the nationalism or radicalism then sweeping Africa, which had engulfed his younger colleagues in government. Across the continent and around the world, the Banda regime became known for its collaboration with apartheid South Africa and Portuguese Mozambique. Kamuzu Banda defended his foreign and domestic politics as being necessary evils. He justified his actions by saying that white regimes were far too powerful to be antagonized by a small, landlocked emerging nation-state. To fight them would be to cut Malawi's economic, political, and military throat. For instance, Mozambique owned landlocked Malawi's only access to the sea, so Prime Minister Banda saw no choice but to remain on good terms with them. As for apartheid South Africa, to Kamuzu Banda, it would be nothing short of foolish to oppose its considerable military strength. In addition, approximately 80,000 Malawians who were employed in South African mines brought up to $1 million annually in remittances to Malawi. Malawi was the only black African nation that openly refused to comply with the United Nations economic sanctions against Rhodesia. These are the reasons why Kamuzu's ministers rebelled against him. Stung by his ministers' charges of paternalism, Kamuzu immediately fired the 3 instigators in his cabinet. In October of 1967, Yatuta Chisiza, who had resigned in 1964, led an abortive anti-government raid in the north of the country after Kamuzu Banda had announced that Malawi was to establish diplomatic relations with South Africa. This raid was easily defeated, and Yatuta and 14 others were later executed. This cabinet crisis of 1964 was a turning point in Malawi's short post-colonial history. Between 1966 and the end of the decade, Kamuzu Banda had enacted the constitutional changes that made him a formidably powerful president of a one-party state. In May of 1966, he was elected the first president of the republic by the National Assembly, and on 6 July of that year, Malawi became a republic and his MCP party became the only legal party. The president was authorized to appoint up to 3 persons as cabinet ministers who were not MPs. In February of 1968, this limitation was removed. In 1971, Hastings Kamuzu Banda became Malawi's life president and visited apartheid South Africa, the first African head of state to do so. From the very beginning, Hastings Kamuzu Banda based his leadership style on tight control of the press, the judiciary, and the legislature. He was not only president for life of the country and president of its only legal political party, he was also at one point Minister of External Affairs, Minister of Justice, Minister of Public Works, Minister of Agriculture, Minister of Community Development, and Minister of Social Welfare. For all intents and purposes, Malawi was not even a one-party state, it was a one-man state. The state apparatus was answerable to only one man, Kamuzu Banda. The result was a climate of fear, almost unparalleled anywhere in Africa, even in countries that were wrecked by violence. Hastings Banda's grip on power extended not just over the government and the economy of the country, but even over the moral standards under which the population was required to live. Men were forbidden to wear long hair, and women were forbidden to wear short skirts or trousers. President Banda went even further, lecturing young women on the evils of the miniskirt and also lecturing young men on the evils of having afros and dreadlocks. These restrictions were even extended to foreign tourists. In Banda's Malawi, films, foreign newspapers, magazines and books were strictly censored to prevent decadent Western influences from harming the population. President Banda even banned the song titled Cecilia by Simon and Garfunkel. The ban on the song was in respect to his longtime companion, Cecilia Kadzamira, who had worked in a clinic that Banda once owned. Kadzamira was one of the country's most powerful figures and held the title of official hostess. No other African leader imposed his personality with such vigor and force on the country he ruled. Kamuzu Banda tolerated neither dissent nor criticism, and no one was permitted to question his authority or his decisions. The president was extremely wary of threats to his position and authority, and this was reflected in May of 1983 when 3 prominent cabinet ministers with large constituencies and a member of parliament died in a car accident. Reports surrounding this event suggested that they may have been murdered by the police. Kamuzu Banda's special security apparatus, the Malawi Young Pioneers, along with an array of spies and paramilitary units, were used to intimidate civil society and harass Malawian exiles abroad. President Banda's domination of Malawi continued throughout the 1970s and the 1980s, as did abuse of human rights. However, with the demise of the Cold War, the Western powers that had once supported him began to press for political reform, and by the early 1990s, the financial aid they provided to Malawi was conditional on change. Also at that point, the economy was in deep trouble. Inflation was around 22% at the end of the year 1993. Unemployment, crime and hunger had reached unprecedented proportions. The drought of 1992 made matters worse as displaced peasants migrated to the urban areas. The introduction of the IMF and World Bank supervised structural adjustment program also unintentionally facilitated the march to multi-party democracy through the unequal distribution of the pains and costs associated with such an adjustment. The badly run monetary policies of the structural adjustment program further impoverished people who were already poor, alienated them from the state, and also forced them not just to adopt coping strategies but to resist the state, which they saw as being directly responsible for their poverty. In addition to all of this, by 1990, President Banda's health appeared to be deteriorating. Towards the end, he was becoming senile, and he also had brain surgery in 1993 and seemed very dependent on his long-time companion Cecilia Kadzamira and their uncle John Tembo, the Minister of State. Within Malawi, pressure was really mounting, and by the end of 1992, Kamuzu Banda was forced to accept the possibility of losing his position of power. In the face of this pressure, Banda allowed for a 1993 referendum on multi-party democracy, which led to multi-party elections the following year. During the campaign season, his rallies were poorly attended, as he struggled to read his prepared speeches under a blazing sun. When he spoke, he reverted to speeches he had given 30 years before, asking the people to choose between him and colonial rule. Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda performed dismally in the elections, and for him it was a shattering personal rejection. Bakili Muluzi, the leader of the United Democratic Front, who had won in these elections, formed a government. Hastings Kamuzu Banda went into retirement and stepped down as life president of his party in July of 1997, a move it has been suggested to secure his legacy as elder statesman and father of the nation. Aging and frail, he virtually retired from politics. Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda died on 25 November 1997. His death shocked Malawi. Many people had known Kamuzu as the Ngwazi, or conqueror as he called himself. To some of them, he was the Messiah and had dominated Malawi from its inception. Don't forget to like and share the video if you enjoyed it. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been Tatenda for African Biographics. Until next time, cheers. Have a good one.